Well, thank you everyone for coming out tonight. And as I look in the audience, I see familiar faces, and I know many of you have been part of this journey this fall in which we've talked a lot about leadership and statesmanship and some of the struggles of Illinois. So we found the perfect person to kind of connect these themes and talk about Illinois' difficulties over these last several decades and just the importance of leadership and getting our state back on track. Jim Nowlan is the perfect person to put all this together because Jim is kind of a renaissance man of Illinois politics and history. He's been on the scene since about a half a century, although he looks much, much younger than that. Jim was a state rep at the age of about 26, I think, in the early 70s or 60s, 69?
50 years ago, 68.
68, okay, yeah, so Jim... Yeah. Get a chair for him, please. He was also a candidate for lieutenant governor running with Richard Ogilvy and was almost part of what would have been a wonderful race between Paul Simon and Richard Ogilvy for governor had Dan Walker not entered the scene and defeated Paul Simon. But Jim has been the director of a state agency. He's been a senior aide to 3 governors. Isn't that right, Jim? We practiced that a little beforehand, I have to confess. The hanging curveball. Also campaign manager for U.S. Senate and presidential candidates. He's been a professor at Knox, University of Illinois, and Northern Illinois University. He's the author of a number of really wonderful books, including one that we're using at the Institute called Fixing Illinois. He's written a primer on Illinois politics. He even moved into the world of racy novels, writing a novel about Illinois politics from World War II to about 1970.
I thought sex would sell.
As best I can tell, Paul Simon isn't mentioned in any of these, so we can breathe a sigh of relief. And actually, if you're looking for a good read on a plane or a train ride, you can get a copy of Jim's book on his website, jimnowlan.com. But more seriously, on that website too, you can see some of the essays that Jim has written about Illinois politics and history. And the tone, I think, is both a kind of a gentle admonishment, but also a hopeful one, believing that the Illinois can get back on track, has a lot of important strengths that can be developed and built upon by hopefully a new generation of leaders. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn over to Jim. He's going to talk. He and I are going to have just a brief conversation, and then we're going to open it up to you and really spend the bulk of the time getting questions and comments from you in the audience. So, Jim Nowlan.
Okay. Thanks a lot. I have quite a bit of material here, and I probably won't be able to cover it all, so I look forward to a rich discussion with Senator Ken Busby and Professor John Jackson in the audience, who know more about Illinois than I ever will. They undoubtedly will straighten me out on some items and enrich the discussion. When I was the invisible candidate for lieutenant governor, this would have represented a massive outpouring of interest in my campaign, but I found that the size of an audience was a relative thing. I once gave a talk to a Lions Club in tiny Lafayette, Illinois. We held our dinner meeting at a tavern on the square at a table for 6. But after the meeting, the president of the club complimented me by saying it was the best turnout they'd had all year. Since nobody would come listen to me, I tried to reach out to people however I could, and I went on to the radio talk shows which were coming into vogue, and I was once up in Sterling Rock Falls on WSDR's morning show Conversation. Host and I crowded into the booth, put our elbows up on the record turntables, and opened to the 2 lines. There were 2 calls at the beginning of the show from ladies, and I thought I gave excellent answers to their questions. Then there was a dry spell and nobody called in. I started rambling about the problems of government, and nobody called in. And so I kept rambling, began to think I was probably the most profound political thinker since Jefferson occupied the White House, when finally the phone rang and we both grabbed for it and onto the air came the crackling voice of a mature lady who said, "Excuse me, Sonny, but I'd like to break in and offer to all the ladies out there my latest carrot cake recipe." Made me appreciate how important I was in Sterling that day. So with you as a captive audience for 15 or 20 minutes, and my friend Alan's going to give me the high sign at 15. Is that okay? Is 20 okay? Okay. I'm going to talk about leadership past in Illinois and what may set those leaders apart from today, where things stand today and why, and then finally a look at possible leadership going forward. Have we had any really good, strong leaders as governors? Yes. I'll go quickly. Edward Coles, 1822 to 1826. He was President James Madison's secretary for 6 years. He was born with a sense of noblesse oblige, and after leading the first U.S. mission on a warship to the Baltic Sea, he decided to move out to Illinois. Before he reached the state, he freed the slaves that he inherited, developed a big farm near Edwardsville, and found that slavery was actually really rather popular in Illinois at the time. After adoption of the 1818 Constitution of our state 200 years ago, the legislature developed black codes that were probably more strict and oppressive than those in many southern states. In 1824, the legislature, by a majority of 3/4, voted to create a new constitution at which they were going to institute slavery, just as Missouri had been allowed to do as part of the 1820 Compromise. Edward Coles bought one of the few newspapers in the state and made it his mission over 6 months through the newspaper and through travel and through creation of anti-slavery societies and other groups to defeat the call for what would have been a slavery convention. And it was indeed defeated narrowly, 6,600 votes to 5,000 votes. As Bob Howard, a chronicler of Illinois governors, said, had the convention succeeded, undreamed of turmoil would have resulted for Illinois and the development of the Northwest. Unlike Coles, Thomas Ford came from poverty. He served as governor from 1842 to 46. He was a farm laborer and servant in a country tavern, but he was taken under the wing of a successful lawyer who taught him the law, and ultimately Ford rose to the state Supreme Court. As governor, Ford found the state in parlous debt, and he felt something had to be done about the huge debts. They had to be paid off 100% in order to encourage Eastern and English investors to invest in the state. The debt resulted from a flurry of internal improvements, that is, infrastructure projects, canals, railroads, highways, most of which never moved past initial construction. They were never completed, and default on the debt would have been the easy thing to do. But Coles said, we have to pay off these debts, and under his leadership, the legislature adopted a property tax levy to begin to pay off the staggering debt load, and indeed the bondholders were ultimately paid in full, and Illinois blossomed with imported capital. In the 1890s, German-born Democrat John Peter Altgeld became the liberal Chicago Democrat governor who took higher education very seriously, expanded the U of I, created colleges at DeKalb and Charleston. SIU had already been created. He is best known for his political courage in pardoning the Haymarket riot anarchists whom he felt had been railroaded into prison for murders they didn't commit. The public became enraged by his lengthy tome about why the Haymarket rioters should be pardoned, and it ruined his political career because the action had been popular with the Illinois public. Later, in an era when bribery was common, Altgeld, near bankruptcy himself, because of the severe recession of the 1890s, refused a bribe of between $500,000 to $1 million from Charles T. Yerkes, a fascinating character himself for another discussion, to sign a bill to extend streetcar leases in Chicago. He vetoed the bill. Yerkes said there will be other governors, and indeed there were, and the next governor signed the legislation. Frank Loudon, Republican, progressive, 1917 to 21, farm boy turned millionaire lawyer, modernized state government, which was a incredible, complex jigsaw puzzle of boards and commissions with sinecures for many people who were appointed to work on those commissions and provided patronage jobs for many. He consolidated state government into 9 code agencies, and probably would have become the presidential candidate and president in 1920 because of his modernization. But he refused to play ball with the corrupt Chicago Republican faction of his party. And so at the 1920 nominating convention, the anti-Loudon faction of Illinois delegates refused to support him, which caused the rest of the delegates to think Loudon must not be a strong governor because he doesn't have his whole delegation with him. And so the lack of support meant that he was denied the majority, and thus Warren G. Harding became the nominee. Henry Horner, 1930s, the Depression governor, Democrat from Chicago, saw Illinois through the Depression when the legislature met almost continuously. My grandfather was a member of the legislature then. He broke with the Chicago political machine that opposed his re-election. He convinced the legislature to enact a new sales tax to replace the ineffective statewide property tax, and saw the state through the Depression with significant funds to support those who were on the soup lines. William G. Stratton, 1953 to 60, progressive Republican. He was a builder. He made Route 66 into 4 lanes. He built 7,000 miles of new highways. He created the tollway system, expressways in Chicago, university and mental health services expansion. He took on his own party to enact reapportionment and redistricting of Illinois in 1955, long before the U.S. Supreme Court in 1962 or 63, through Baker versus Carr and subsequent decisions, decided that should be done across the nation. It hurt Republicans downstate because it added districts in the rapidly growing suburbs and Chicago. He also spoke favorably about civil rights at a time such was not popular within his own party. And he created judicial reform of the state, reducing the influence of the justices of the peace and creating a court administrator and rationalizing the court system. One of my favorite governors was Dick Ogilvy, 1969 to 73. I have a bias because, as it might have been mentioned, I was his running mate in his unsuccessful bid for a second term in 1972. A no-nonsense World War II tank commander, Ogilvy loved executive management. He modernized and gave professional leadership as Cook County Sheriff, as Cook County Board President, and as governor. As the state's chief executive, he created a state budget bureau and a set of environmental protection units, the Illinois EPA and Pollution Control Board and Institute for Environmental Quality, the first comprehensive set of environmental units in the nation preceding the U.S. EPA. He's best known for enacting the Illinois income tax with bipartisan support, but he was, for that and maybe some other reasons, defeated in 1972. If you'd like to read more about our governors, the book Mostly Good and Competent Men by Robert Howard is available. It's been updated by former Paul Simon Policy Institute Director Mike Lawrence, and it's a fun read through Illinois history. What do these governors share? 5 of the 7 served only one term and were either defeated in their re-election bids or probably would have been. Leadership may not be appreciated. So far as the record shows, they were also all honest. Stratton was indicted and prosecuted but found not guilty of spending campaign funds inappropriately. In contrast, prior to Quinn and Rauner, prior to those two, 4 of the preceding 7 governors were measured for striped suits, that is, convicted of crimes. So where are we today and why are we here? We may have a culture of corruption in Illinois that hangs on. That is, many people are inculcated with the norm that if you have an opportunity to take advantage of government, do so, because others would do so if they were in your shoes, or so too many of us think. And I could go on about the fact that we've had 1,800 convictions for public corruption in Illinois since 1976. Per capita basis, that ranks us 3rd in the nation. The number of public corruption convictions in the Northern District of Illinois, federal court, metropolitan Chicago, is more than in any other federal district court in the nation. We've also developed, so that's one, culture of corruption is a possibility we can discuss. Second, we have endured severe fiscal stress in recent decades. Medicaid and pension payments, the latter the result of bad decisions made over decades, have grown dramatically, and they have squeezed other segments of our state government, including higher education. We also have a careerist, professional, political environment that exacerbates, makes worse, the human desire, probably in all of us, that we want to do things for people, such as government programs, but we do not want to do things to people, like the taxes to pay for those programs. And as a result, this has resulted in us spending more each year by $2 or $3 billion a year over many years than we've been taking in, and it's put us into a deep hole. The third factor that affects leadership and where we are today is, in my mind, that we are awash in political money, and that combined with the decline of political party organizations has reshaped politics and possibly reshaped the nature of those who participate in politics or are willing to do so. We might get into a discussion of that later on. For example, the Rich Miller Political Insider blog each day goes over various political races in the state, and he focuses almost entirely on who has raised how much more money in the past week, who has poured money into campaigns, how have candidates responded to the money put in by their opponents. It seems as if politics is all about the money raised rather than the substantive issues. When I ran for the legislature 50 years ago in a contested race, 2 contested races, I spent $4,000 in those days, $40,000 today approximately. this past year, a former student of mine ran for the legislature and spent $1 million in a losing race to a competitor who spent about the same amount of money. So the magnitude of money in campaigns has dramatically increased. Where are we, and what can we do about it? The old Pogo cartoon in which he surveys the world and declares, "We have discovered the enemy, and he is us." And so it may be in Illinois. We are so glum about our fiscal, tax, political, and corruption problems that many of us, or at least many of my friends, have given up on the state. And their dour attitude is infectious. We all need a strong dose of Norman Vincent Peale's power of positive thinking, which can also be infectious. And I say that because for most of our state's history, our great strengths, and here I'll dot point them before finishing the sentence: location in the middle of the country, dense networks of interstate highways and railroads, probably the strongest networks in the nation, the nation's leading airport for domestic and international connections, an incredibly vibrant central city, Chicago, copious surface and underground water supplies, and much higher than typical percentages of population with bachelor's and advanced degrees. These have made Illinois a leader in the past, and I think we fail to promote those strengths because of the dour attitudes we have about the negatives that we have faced in recent years. So I think we can regain our leadership status, but it won't be easy. First, we have to stabilize and make our fiscal system predictable for business, something it hasn't been in a couple of decades. We have been running each year a deficit of about $2 to $3 billion, and business has no sense of what are the taxes going to be 5 years from now. Can I locate here? What are my costs going to be related to taxation of property and of our sales and of our revenue? Representative Steve Reich of Woodstock has proposed a major Illinois Budget Efficiency and Savings Commission. That sounds like an easy thing, and it is, but incredibly there hasn't been a serious attempt, and maybe Kenny and John can correct me here, but I don't think there's been a serious attempt at such a comprehensive, thorough look at spending in Illinois over the decades. And our appropriations or spending authority process is in shambles. Each year we have a budget, or at least when we have a budget, a small group of legislative leaders gather in secret at the end of the legislative session and hammer out a budget based on last year's spending. We can do better than that. I think Steve's efforts would result in some savings, maybe not enough to close the deficit gap, but we have to try, and we have to make it clear to our tax-paying citizens that we are serious about our desire to spend their money responsibly. Second, we have to address the oppressive burden placed on taxpayers by efforts to shore up our underfunded state employee pension system. At present, we are spending each year the equivalent of 30% of our income tax revenue solely on building up our pension assets. That's beyond the normal cost of each year's additional pension obligations incurred by and for employees. We've already reduced future pensions for new employees, and we've tried repeatedly, but been rebuffed by the state's highest court to eliminate what I think are overly generous benefits, such as the minimum 3% annual compounded increases in our state pension benefits. I've concluded that the best, most practicable array among terrible options, they're all terrible, and this one is too, is to stretch out our efforts to rebuild the pension assets. Instead of 90% of full funding by 45, maybe 70% by 2055. All benefits would continue to be paid. Our budget crisis is now, not in 2045, when taxpayers would see their pension burden cut dramatically under the present law, which we all want to achieve at some point. Third, we need to start a process of long-term thinking about where we want to be in 5, 10, even 20 years, and of how to get there. For example, are we thinking about the consequences of climate change for Illinois? Are we thinking about the role of water in Illinois versus states which are becoming more parched and drier, wondering where their next drop of water will come from? Now, long-term thinking requires collaboration among lots of experts as well as elected officials. Again, to my knowledge, this has never been done in Illinois. Long-term thinking doesn't guarantee you outcomes, but at least it helps you get a sense of what you need to do now to get to where you want to be in 5 or 10 years. Also, to make such a process work, we need to reject our toxic, hideously negative politics and politics by billionaires process. Conflict will always be a part of politics. It's the raison d'etre of representative government. That's what we're here for, to resolve conflict. And indeed, we have had stretches in our nation's history of very feisty, yet ultimately collaborative, bipartisan conflict resolution. Most of those governors whom I dot pointed earlier worked ultimately in a bipartisan fashion to achieve their respective objectives. Well, how do we do this? I say that to accomplish this, the graduates of the Edgar Fellows Program must step up, and soon. You say, what is that? Who are they? And I say that the program, which I'll explain quickly, is one of the most significant programs in Illinois in the past few decades. For the past 7 years, former Governor Jim Edgar has gathered a bipartisan, statewide group of younger, destined for success leaders for an intensive week of seminars and across-the-aisle bonding. The fellows hear from the likes of former U.S. Senator Dick Lugar, Congressman Cabinet Member Ray LaHood, and others about how to get constructive things done and done in a civil way. And after the long days events of the week are over, the men and women go out and have a glass of sarsaparilla afterwards and get to know one another and find out that the other party's representatives don't have horns. And it's been good. More than 2/3 of the fellows have become state legislators, congressmen, mayors, and civic leaders. And they have proved they can work together to get things done, as with the recent complex school funding reform legislation hammered out by Edgar Fellows of both parties during the last legislative session. The fellows need to step up their game in a couple of ways. First, I would suggest convene an annual major gathering for long-term thinking. Second, start running for top offices and don't wait to be anointed by the money bags and political powers that be. Third, remember that it's all about Illinois and your fellow citizens, not about you. And Illinois has all the pieces to be a leader again. We just have to put them together. So what are the options for the future? And I'll wrap up here in a couple of minutes. First, we need to think long term, it won't happen overnight, about changing our political culture, our culture of corruption, and our sense that political careerism and things being about us rather than our citizens is most important. I think maybe Paul Simon was beginning to try to change our political culture. And culture can be changed. Think about when people like John Jackson and I were young, smoking and drinking and driving were kind of standard operating procedure, part of our culture. And now, as a result of extensive campaigns, public and private, smoking and drinking while driving are way down. We've changed our culture. And think about Texas, where the roadsides were always messy until they came along with the simple slogan, "Don't mess with Texas." And the roads are remarkably cleaner than they were before that important message was sent out. Second, change the culture of running for office. The politics of winning at all costs has led us to a vicious, uncivil politics that is destroying trust and confidence in our system. I wonder, speculation only, and a good question for political science graduate students of John's, if the present politics is changing the nature of who seeks office. Harold Lasswell was a political scientist when I was a kid graduate student, and he pointed out in the Pathology of Politics and similar books that people who go into politics have an even greater need than those who go into business or teaching or other fields, greater need to be liked, to prove through election that they are liked and supported. And it may be, and this is speculation only for discussion maybe, are those with a less of a need to be liked opting out of running for office because of the toxic nature of it and the cost of it, while those with a kind of pathology of politics are the ones who go ahead and are willing to win at all costs and say anything about their opponent at all costs. Third and finally, something I don't really recommend, but is there a place for a new party? I'm guessing probably not the kind of party I would like, being a mushy, moderate Eisenhower Republican, because we moderates fail to stir the soul, as Daniel Burnham said at one time. We're moderate. So my kind of party might not make it in this environment, and John Jackson, of course, a long-term Democrat activist, might have some thoughts on an observation like that. And so why don't I just close with what I hope maybe are some stimulating observations that might lead to a good, rich discussion. Okay, I'll stay up here.
Jim, I might just ask the first question, and then others can think of theirs. As you look at the current Illinois political scene, are there some things happening at the local level? Are there some mayors and city councilmen? Is there things going on below the state level that gives more hope? Is there more of a problem-solving ethos than we would see in Springfield or Washington?
Several observers have said that American politics appears appear to be working better at the local level than at the state and national level. I operate a weekly newspaper in my county, among other of my sundry activities, and every now and then my ace reporter can't make, my only reporter, my ace reporter can't make a county board meeting or a city council meeting, and so I'll sit in. And I'm impressed. These people care about their communities. They proceed on a basis that has conflict. As I said, it's natural to our process, but they don't seem to be consumed by themselves, and they want to solve problems. So I think some of these people are the ones bubbling up into the Edgar Fellows program. This program has had now probably 150 or 200 graduates, and they convene from time to time. It's not as if they go for a week and then forget about the friendships they have created. They get back together, and that's important, and they're building a terrific network. So, yes, I am hopeful, but I think these persons need to admonish themselves continually that if they move up the ladder, they have to realize that it's about their constituents and not about them, which we would always say is the case, but sometimes winning becomes more important than the public service. Getting back to the fact that 5 out of the 7 governors I identified served only one term and probably weren't appreciated for what they did, even though, as Ogilvy said in one of his campaign themes, do right and damn the odds. And that may be difficult when you realize millions of dollars are being raised and spent in your campaign, and you find that compels you to do anything to win and to be a purveyor of the toxicity of the campaigns. But we need to be admonished that there are other ways to do it. John, Ken, others of you, was there a question back here, sir, or a comment?
Jim, thank you for coming, and I read your column whenever I can find it. The Reagan-era veto of, well, actually, it's not Reagan, veto of the Fairness Doctrine, and I don't know the exact number on the bill, but it was a bipartisan bill to, I'm not sure exactly how the FCC was supposed to regulate this, but news organizations were supposed to minimize bias, and generally print media does an excellent job for the most part. Broadcast media maybe not so great, and there's some egregious examples of terrible journalism. I wouldn't even call it journalism, So what do you think of reinstituting, what's the chance of reinstituting the Fairness Doctrine or something like that for broadcast media?
I doubt, I haven't looked into the politics of that. I doubt there's much chance of doing so. The Fairness Doctrine, and again, John probably is a much better student of this than I am, required that there be pro and con kinds of discussion in political debate, political coverage by the media. And I think on balance, that balance is helpful. It isn't perfect because sometimes 90% are on this side and 10% on this side, but the 10% get the same coverage as the 90% position would, which itself is not balanced. But I agree things are out of kilter right now. There are a couple of groups. NewsGuard, I think, is one. You'd have to look that up, Google it. I may have the name slightly wrong, which is a group of seasoned journalists and editors of both parties or of both persuasions who are evaluating news coverage and giving stars, the equivalent of stars to coverage, 4 stars for good coverage, balanced, transparent. We know, who's behind the statements, and the statements are verifiable, that sort of thing, and that might help readers get a feel for the quality of the respective coverage. But to the fairness, do you have any thoughts on that, John Jackson?
I would add a more positive other thing, and that is, in this area, 2 of the television stations have young reporters doing fact-checking on the ads their stations are running and doing a great job with it.
Interesting,
It's
good,
kind of
good,
brought up.
yeah.
I think that's a really good extension of the same problem.
Yeah. But I'm going to guess the politics of getting back to a fairness doctrine will be difficult. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try. That's the whole point of my discussion this evening. Other comments, observations? Ken, I want to hear from you.
I want to hear from you. That's why I'm here.
There wasn't much on television tonight, Ken said.
I was a little surprised that you left out 2 recent members, 2 governors.
Okay,
You named 7, and you might be surprised at the 2 that I named.
okay,
Jim Thompson and Jim Edgar.
sure.
In my opinion, both of those gentlemen were fine governors. I fought with them a lot. I loved fighting. They were fun to fight with.
Yeah,
Thompson in particular was fun to fight with. But I thought he did a great job for the most part. I thought he stayed 1 term too long. He served 14 years. I thought he should have left at the end of 10. The last 4 years is when he went on his spending spree and built the Thompson Center in Chicago, and that big monument to nothing.
yeah,
And Jim Edgar, and I've told Jim Edgar this, I said, I'm surprised to hear myself saying this, but I wish you were our governor today. And he brought the fiscal picture back into balance after Jim Thompson's kind of wild spending spree.
and George Ryan in there, yeah.
And George Ryan, he went to prison. I knew George. He was a lot of fun to fight with too, by
Sure.
the way, when he was Speaker of the House. I told him that one time. I'd rather fight with you than anybody I know. Get that Irish temper of his up, and he was a lot of fun. But he made a lot of mistakes. And the mistakes he made, in my opinion, was the people that he had around him. And otherwise, I think he would have been a decent governor. He came from the old Kankakee County Republican politics, where you take care of your folks.
Yeah.
That's the only thing they were really interested in.
Yeah.
But I thought those 2 that I already named were in particular.
Yeah, I think they were good governors, and they're friends of mine, and they've done some good things. But the others offered courage at critical times. We all serve in different times, of course. So not putting them down by not mentioning them.
Right, okay. And I think one thing that happened to our politics, not just in the state, but it's happened about the same time in the state and at the national level, and that was in the early 90s when Newt Gingrich decided that he was going to become Peck's bad boy and destroy anybody that didn't agree with him. And at the same time, Pate Phillip became the president of the Illinois Senate, and where he told the Republican senators, you will not go out and socialize with the Democratic senators. He told the Republican staff that they could not socialize with the Democratic staff or any Democratic senators, and that toxic condition just multiplied.
Uh-huh.
I think part of the success I had in the legislature came about because I had almost as many good friends on the Republican side as I had on the Democratic side.
Yeah.
And I know that was the same with you. We liked each other.
Yeah.
And we talked to each other. And we fight like hell on the floor sometimes. But it wasn't personal. And Republican friends of mine died, I went to their funeral and shed tears.
Yeah.
And I don't see any of that since the early 90s. And I attribute it to those two people that I named.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they were good. Yeah. Yeah.
No, and I attribute the animosity.
Oh, to Newt Gingrich and to Pate. I see. Yeah. 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 Well,
And by the way, you are a dinosaur, as I guess perhaps I am also. There aren't many Republicans like you anymore, Jim.
yeah, we've polarized. There's not room for people from the middle. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't know how we get that back. Are they writing about this in political science journals, John? What are they saying?
Well, they are saying that we're polarized on all of these things. Whether, how we get out of it, they're not saying so.
Any other? Yes, sir. And then to this gentleman. This gentleman.
Why do we elect judges in Illinois and make them declare parties and then expect them to be impartial when most people don't really know what they're voting on for judges?
We do so because Richard J. Daley, first Daley mayor of Chicago, rejected efforts by Governor Stratton to create something like the Missouri Plan, in which there's a nominating process that sifts the wheat from the chaff among different possible judge prospects, and the governor then makes the final selection. So Daley said that electing judges in Chicago was critical to his political power, and it still is to that of Eddie Burke, the chairman of the Finance Committee of the Chicago City Council, who chairs the Cook County Democratic Judicial Selection Committee, which is tantamount to election to judgeships in Cook County. So we still elect our judges. I think a process of similar to the Missouri Plan would be better. It was also on the 1970 Constitutional Convention proposal as a side issue. It was to be or not to be. That was the number of the side issue that we voted on, and downstaters, more so than upstaters, voted to continue election of judges rather than appointment of judges. So we don't have something that you and I might think is better. John and I were talking on the walk over here from the Simon Institute. I think because of our dire situation that I dot pointed in the middle of my talk, there will probably be proposals to hold a constitutional convention sometime in the near future. I doubt that it will go anywhere in terms of the requirement that the legislature must vote 3/5 support in both houses to put it on the ballot, if I have that right, and I think I do. But a convention would review things like that. Yes, sir.
15, 20 years ago, when I interacted with legislators all the time, and
What was your role? I think we've met somewhere
I was
along.
the chief financial officer for the SIU.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
We developed a long-term plan for fully funding the university retirement system. And, when they started out, they started out with a bill for 100%. Greg Mazzani, who was at U of I then, and myself, we told him there's no way you don't need 100%. 90% is more than enough. And they developed a 40-year plan for not only funding immediate, that annual need and reconstituting a 90% funding for the plan. And the legislature passed it, okay? But, the subsequent legislators didn't fund it. So, I mean, how do you get, I mean, they actually did a good job and came up with a good long-term plan.
Yes, I think the plan had merit. At the same time, however, over those years, each biennium there was a bill called the pension bill that was slowly sneaking its way through the legislature. And it provided benefits, extra benefits. 50%, 60% of all judges today receive more net income the day after they retire than they did their last day on the bench. That's how rich some of our pensions have become. And
No, but that wasn't the case with the university system, which, you know, was huge. I mean, they actually developed it, they had the guidelines, and there wasn't any benefits added.
no, but these were separate. I mean, underfunding is one part of our problem. The other is additional benefits that have been added over the years. And then third has been our over-optimistic projections of the discount rate or what it is we can expect our asset base to generate in dividends and interest. And the combination of the three has put us in this terrible hole. And I contend it's because we want to do things for people and not to people. And so that's why we have this problem that we have, even with, you know, the good work you and Craig and others might have done.
Well, but the problem was back then, because we were on the Administrative Advisory Committee for service also, and we averaged over a 30-year time period, we averaged making 10-12% of our return on our money. And the legislature, at that time, the legislature wasn't putting the money in there.
Yeah.
So if they put their $2 million in that, you know, then, you know, look what that may worth now.
Yeah, right.
But,
Yeah,
you know, we kept borrowing from the future.
yeah.
They
But-
spent the money on something else. So if one legislature has the courage to develop good plans, you know,
Yeah.
how do you keep a subsequent legislature from disarray, you know?
Yeah, it's difficult. I would note that Craig receives $350,000 a year in benefits.
Oh, yeah, he did some things that
Yeah.
probably shouldn't have been done.
Jim, maybe the last question from
Okay.
I think in the 12 years that I served there, we did a pension plan rewrite 3 times, and they all 3 passed. The last one that I recall was sponsored by Doc Shapiro, the Republican leader in the Illinois Senate, and it passed. And I remember that Phil Rock, who was then the president of the Senate, my very dear friend, said to me, "I'm not sure why we're putting all this money into pension systems when we've got all these other problems that we need to face immediately."
Yeah,
And that is the legislators'
dilemma.
dilemma, constantly. The headlines of the Chicago Tribune, the story about a live-in boyfriend that drop-kicked the woman's baby until the baby died, and then somebody says, "Why didn't DCFS do something about that?" Well, legislature, you need to put more money into DCFS so we can hire more social workers so we don't have babies being drop-kicked.
Yeah.
And so that's the same thing about long-term planning. Yes, we need to do long-term planning, and I agree with you completely. The idea of some group forming somewhere to look at the potential problems, but a legislator, I'm talking about from my day, I don't know about what goes on now, but in my day, a legislator responded to the crisis of the moment.
Yeah.
And the crisis of the moment was the baby, or was whatever it may be. It was not pensions that are going to be paid out in 30 or 40 or 50 years. So we passed those 3 reforms that I recall, and then promptly the next year
Didn't fund them. Yeah,
Didn't fund them.
yeah.
Well, the other part of that crisis was getting reelected in 2 or 4 years.
That's right.
Yeah,
That was their long-term plan.
yeah, exactly. Thanks for the question.
Well, yeah, Jim, thank you so much. You've really kind of displayed your encyclopedic knowledge of Illinois history. And I really would encourage all of you to look at Jim's website, jimnowlan.com. A wonderful wide array of essays about Illinois politics history. I was telling him I just read a wonderful essay he wrote about a Denny's on Father's Day. He happened to be traveling through, I guess, the Metro East area and stopped by, and it's a wonderfully kind of poignant description of seeing kind of unlikely heroes in a Denny's, you know, putting together this meals for a packed audience. So there's all sorts of wonderful essays on Illinois higher education too. He's written some wonderful pieces on just the challenges facing higher education. And also go out and get that racy novel. You'll enjoy that.
It
for
isn't that
your
racy.
Christmas reading.
And everybody in my novels is either a person I know or a composite of people.
So Jim Nowlan, thank you so very much. I appreciate it.